Hello, everyone. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Katarna. I'm really happy today to have with us David Carradini. David is a very exemplary individual. And in fact, as I begin this, I'm going to actually read his bio. It's something I don't normally do, but it's so interesting what David has done. And I want you to be able to have a sense of what he's done. So here we go. I'm going to read about 4 or 5 sentences. David Carradini was born on Long Island, New York, and was educated in New England and overseas. Throughout the course of his career, he has worked in sales, assessments, coaching, and talent acquisition in settings such as AT&T, small business, the federal government, where he worked in the faith-based initiative under Presidents Bush and Obama, and education. In the last sector, David has worked as a teacher and administrator in grades K to 12. He currently makes his home with his wife, Rosemary, in Northern Virginia, where he is a catechist, lector, and tenor at St. Teresa's Church, and where he serves as his region's Defense of the Faith chair of the Order of Malta, Federal Association's Northern Virginia region. He's a Knight Commander of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem and a Knight of Merit of the Sacred Military Constantinian Order of St. George. He's president of and CEO of Carradini, LLC, a firm that focuses on professional development, coaching, and education. In his free time, David hunts and fishes, cooks and gardens, and goes on longish walks with his greyhound, Legolas. So that's a very impressive background, David. And you and I share some things, like we are consultants and coaches, and I too am a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. So welcome, David. How are you today?
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. I'm doing great, Henry. Thanks. And I'm really thrilled to be doing this interview.
Yes, we're really happy to have you, because that background of yours is something that we'll delve into and talk about it. And, and the purpose of this kind of an interview is to understand how exemplary Catholics are living their life, leading organizations, doing things, and trying to work within the culture and, resist the culture as much as possible, but at the same time, work in the vineyard and carry out God's kingdom on earth here. So, David, to begin with, you tell us more about these things that you've done. And certainly I'd like to have you go down the path of telling us about your faith journey as well. But maybe you could start with a little bit more information about what all these things are that you have done and how you got into them and how they came to be.
I remember when I was an undergraduate and looking at the life plan, they said you should put your life plan, write down things you want to get done. And in 20 years, 30 years, you look back and see everything you accomplished. And I look back on, if I can find the list, I see most of the things I thought I was going to do, I didn't do, and have done these other things. I would say that the choices I've made in my career, whether it's been in education, direct education or indirect education, sales, coaching, assessments, all comes out of a passion for people. I remember I had a roommate, Jimmy Keneally, tell me in college, "You're a people person." He said, "I know it sounds cliche, but it's true. I've always been a people person. I care about people very deeply." And so I suppose it was natural when I got into business that I would end up in sales, because sales is really more than the product and services you're selling. It's care for the people with whom you're dealing. In coaching and mentoring, obviously, it's trying to help people understand what are the patterns that are working, that are not working in their lives, and what does your past suggest your future might look like, and what does the present suggest they ought to be doing, whether that's in harmony with the past or somewhat of a break. And then I think in terms of talent acquisition, spent a lot of time understanding the people who I was recruiting. I wanted to know what their motives were, or what made them tick, whether they would be a good fit in the organizations for which I was recruiting them, whether the decisions they were making made sense, even in pursuing the opportunity, or whether they were just sort of adrift, casting adrift. So it's always been a passion for people.
This is very interesting because we work as mentors and coaches in particular have to do that. We have to work with the individual and understand what makes them tick and get into them. I'm interested in the fact that you've taken this people skill of yours, but you did a stint in government, and that's something that I did as well. I did 10 years as a deputy minister of economic development and a deputy minister of social services, among other things. But Tell us about the faith-based initiative that you did with two different presidential terms.
Right. So I actually got into that. I got into the faith-based initiative because I had attempted a turnaround of a very small independent school. And we thought we could either turn it around or bring it to a graceful close. And I brought it to a graceful close. And so my wife said, "What do you want to do next?" I said, "Well, I've worked with small institutions in crisis. I think I want to work in a big institution in crisis. So maybe I'll look at the government."
Sure, yes.
I
What?
had heard about the faith-based initiative and thought it was interesting. And so got in touch with some friends who put me in touch, friends who actually were in Holy Sepulchre, who put me in touch with a guy who had actually been a roommate of mine in college for a brief period of time. I'd lost touch with Frank Gannon. And Frank put me in touch with others. And I ended up, my first job in the faith-based initiative was compiling the annual report of what money was going to faith-based organizations and at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And that was a tough job because no one had ever done it before. Some areas of the department had easy access to that information, others didn't. Some wanted to cooperate, some didn't. So that was a real challenge. But the thing is that once that job is done, I mean, that really, it wasn't really, it was a full-time job for the first several months of the year, but then after that, it kind of slowed down. And so I got into working with people, working with organizations, spent time in helping people experiencing homelessness, worked on the continuum of care, trying to educate small faith-based organizations how to work with the federal government, how to win grants, how to establish credibility with local continua of care, working with people in crisis. Worked on youth violence prevention and positive youth development. I worked probably the most meaningful work I've ever done was working with Native Americans under the Obama administration. Took a lot of years to establish credibility, even within HUD, for working with Native American peoples, and the faith-based office and the Denver Office of Native American Programs for HUD sponsored a conference in September 2009. In November 2009, I ended up on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, where my heart was broken by the poverty that I saw. You just cannot imagine the poverty on that reservation. And yet in the midst of that poverty, there's also great joy and hope and resilience. And so we put together a conference for the Northern Plains peoples. From there, I got involved with the Pueblos and tribes in New Mexico, where I did a lot of conference work, engaging experts, doing this standard keynote panel workshop kind of a thing, where we were trying to bring resources in a way that was helpful and not impositional upon Native American peoples. It was very richly rewarding work.
It is rewarding, and I can say that I've shared some of these experiences you've talked about in the Canadian government system, and of course the situation of people in North America is very similar, because culturally and economically Canada and the U.S. are very interrelated, as you know. So, David, the idea of working in government, some people say, well, we need to not be part of it. We need to be kind of isolating as Catholics. But you've plunged into it, and I feel that I've done this as well. But what was your belief then at the time? Did you decide to do this because you could make a difference as an individual? Massive government, with big budgets and all sorts of programs, bureaucratic, is the standard view that people have. But you must have made a difference. What was your thinking about that?
I thought that there's a place for faith-based organizations in our nation's civic life, and if people of faith had expertise that they wanted to bear and can work within the strictures of the federal system, there's no reason why they shouldn't have access to federal money. I think in the faith-based initiative, it's very clear that any sectarian activities had to be strictly segregated out of public funding streams. And so we were using public funding for public purposes. And then but it was just clear that the faith-based organizations often got results that other organizations did not. And it was because of the commitment to people. And to be honest, it was the way people loved. I mean, I remember one organization on coastal Georgia called JC Vision Incorporated. And so I asked her, what is, she said, yeah, no, JC really does stand for Jesus Christ. So I asked her to tell me her story. And she was a military person who'd gotten herself into financial trouble and started reading her Bible very closely. Mm-hmm. And found out biblical principles for money management, got herself out of trouble. And then she said she prayed, what do I do next? And the message she got was help others do the same. And she shared her principles to do that. Now, she was a retired military person, so she spoke governmentese, and she was pretty adept at getting federal funds. I mean, she got housing counseling grants, financial education grants. She did a magnificent job. She started in small town in coastal Georgia, and she ended up, I think, in the last I was in touch with her, she had offices in half of the state of Georgia, and it all flowed out of her faith commitment.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. I don't want to say that people who don't share faith commitments are not motivated to help others. They often are. They are. But there's a quality, I think, that faith-based organizations have. There's a quality of care that flows out of the commitment to the belief that everyone's created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore due a consummate respect. That I think when you don't have that concept clearly to the fore, even though you are motivated humanitarianly and philanthropically, that devotion to the person might get a little bit hazy.
Yeah, this is an important point. Many years ago, I was invited as a special guest of somebody to one of the national prayer breakfasts in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And I was there, and I remember sitting at the table talking with people about the impact of the Catholic Church on all of these institutions. So in terms of schooling and education and hospitals and care, the Catholic Church is, as you know very well, responsible for the inception of a lot of these organizations, but it's about the care of the individual person. That's your theme that you're mentioning, and I'm grateful that we're talking about that. And so how does that now translate into your current work? And I still want to talk about your faith journey too, but I'm just interested now, you're doing a lot of different work and you have a lot of experience. How does this care for the individual then color your work these days? What are some examples, perhaps?
Well, I currently, it's interesting. I'm working right now with a buddy. He's not yet a paying client, although he's indicated he might want to be. Let me back up a little bit. I was working for a global corporation. I don't want to say which one. I liked the work, and I liked the people that I was working with. Mm-hmm. We got a new manager, and the manager's focus was much more on hitting the metrics at each milestone at each time point.
Yes.
And my own assessment, my own recruiting was a little bit different. I mean, I might take a little longer to get it set up, but in the end, as my team lead said, I produced sensational results, but my pacing was not what the new manager wanted, and so I was released from the position. In the end, I think actually that was a good thing for me, and it was a good thing for the corporation. So this is an example. I think sometimes people facing the prospect of separation from a company, whether it's a voluntary or involuntary separation, they don't quite know what to do or whether it's going to be a good thing. But I think we have to go back to the principle in Romans 8:28 that all things work together for the good to those who love God.
Yeah.
Nothing is permanent in life. We have to change. We have to be willing to embrace the unknown and move forward. Yeah. And so I announced on LinkedIn that I was going to be reactivating my LLC. And it was either that day or the next day, I got a call from a gentleman named Paul Winkler, who runs Atalo USA. It's a small coaching organization that's looking to grow into a large coaching organization that is faith-based professional and personal development for small and mid-cap sole proprietors, amongst others.
Yes.
And so he let me know that he saw my profile and thought it was a really good fit. I think that it really is. So I decided that I will work with them to build up a presence here in the Washington, D.C. area. At the same time, I've been working for a number of years on and off on starting an all-boys school in the Diocese of Arlington, because when I first started working on this project, there was no all-boys school in the entire diocese. If you wanted that option, you had to send your kids across the river to Potomac, Maryland, to the Heights, or else to Gonzaga or Georgetown Prep or DeMatha.
Yes.
Those are the four great boys' schools over there, but there's none over here. There now is a new boys' school out in Front Royal. Its focus is a little different from the one that I had envisioned, where my vision of a Catholic school is, for Catholic boys' school, is to educate boys and young men to be leaders of leaders, so that we can influence the culture in a positive way and become better evangelists.
Yeah, this is it's very impressive. You know, my own experience with, as I went to a Jesuit boys' school in a Canadian city, and the inculcation, as the term was used at that time, was to do this, to create men who are leaders of leaders. And so, and that actually happened, because this was in an era, I'm of an age where it was the classical Jesuits still, and they were fantastic. Now, David, you know, we talked, as you mentioned a few moments ago, regarding work as an individual, focusing on individuals and so on. At the Catholic CEO, you know, we have clients. We're doing a fair amount of pro bono work with people who've, for example, lost their jobs due to conscience reasons in the last couple of years. You can imagine some of the scenarios that I'm thinking of here. And so we find that there's a realization that that we have to work within the culture, but we can create a Catholic economy. We can be a powerful economic force and therefore change law, and we can change regulations. We can even change the culture that way. We can resist the culture, but we can change it because we're in the world, but not of it. Can you comment about that? How did you do that in your work? Because I sense you've done that in your work.
So shame on me for not exactly recalling the title of the encyclical, but Paul VI wrote a beautiful encyclical on evangelization, where he really spoke about the ripple effect of evangelization. First, we evangelize ourselves with the good news and the life of prayer and the sacramental life, and then we evangelize in our family, and then we evangelize through influence in the society about us. We're in a tough situation. There's no question about it. The philosophical presuppositions that underline much Catholic teaching are not broadly understood even by Catholics.
Yes.
And so our clergy are often faced with the impossible task of, in a 10-minute homily, trying to communicate all of that in a very succinct and winsome way. It's a very difficult task. And I think part of the issue on how you evangelize, I was just talking to a friend of mine who was with some family members last week, and he said he felt bad because he never had a chance to talk about the faith with those family members. But my word to him was, look, you're living a life of grace, you're praying, you're frequenting the sacraments, your being there was apostolic, your being there was evangelical. You didn't have to do anything specifically religious to be a light in that environment, because you carry the light of Christ in you. And so how does that translate in a business environment? There are people who like the light, and there are people who don't like the light. And we're not going to win everybody. But I think that the first thing that we need to do if we're going to be effective as business leaders in our environments is we have to, first of all, be coherent with the faith. That means we've got to understand it. We can't just be men of prayer and men who frequent the sacraments. We have to have Christian minds. We have to understand, what does the church actually teach about how society should be structured, how it should be ordered. What should a Catholic business do? How should a Catholic business be different? How should a Catholic businessman or businesswoman in a large corporation, how should they be different? Um, you pointed to the fact you're doing a lot of pro bono work with outplaced Catholic business people. I think we're going to see more and more of that because the conscience, our conscience requirements will not permit us
Yes.
to go along with many of the things that are being passed off as normal and as good, not just normal, but good. And I'm specifically avoiding naming examples, but we can, because they're well known to us.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, what is the Catholic principle here? Well, we never condemn anybody. Number one, and number two, I think the best way for us to evangelize, to do apostles by attraction. Somebody should see something different about the way we approach a problem. We approach the same problems, but the way we approach them should be different.
Yeah,
we're dealing with the same people, but the way we deal with them should be different. And I think what we're seeing is as men and women are living that, there's, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, as corporations become ever more explicit in the focus on process and results, not so much people, although they all say they're focused on people, it really is attention to process more than anything else, and the demands of conformity with agendas with which people may or may not agree has a way of pushing people out the door. So what are those folks to do? Can we actually form a parallel Catholic economy? There's a lot of talk about that. I suppose we're going to have to find a way for Catholic business leaders are going to have to find a way to form businesses and to find clients. I think part of the way we do that is we find people who share our values, share our commitments, and our contribution to the common good is to provide valuable services to them so that they in turn can provide valuable services to others. And where the for-profit principle comes into play is it actually is a matter of charity to allow and even ask somebody to give a return for the value that you're giving them. I mean, it's a way of respecting their dignity.
Yeah, absolutely. This you're articulating some of the principles. When I think about our paying clients, we do pro bono work, but we have a lot of paying clients. They're looking for solutions to how to run a business in a Catholic manner because they want to be faithful to the faith, and to do our Lord's work. But at the same time, they're in a secular culture. And so we're working with clients actually, in the US, in Canada, Europe, Oceania, we're working with people who want to make this difference. And we're also working with, I noticed a little trend in the last year, you might say post-pandemic. In the last year, a lot of people have left mid and upper level executive jobs. They're looking to start a business because they know that at some point they're going to have to choose between their faith and their income, and they want to support their family and they have their role. And so it's a big challenge. Now, some of this, I'm relating this to, I'm going to go back now to your personal faith journey, because the man you are today, the guy who articulates this and does these things, you must have had some foundation for this. You didn't just, the Holy Spirit influenced you, but he didn't just zap you last week, I think. So where did you come from in the faith? Did you grow up Catholic? Were you in the faith from the very beginning?
I did not grow up Catholic. Believe it or not, I grew up very anti-Catholic. I was raised in an ardently fundamentalist environment in Long Island, filled with a lot of anti-Catholics who were former Catholics.
Interesting.
And I remember going to vacation Bible school as a little boy. Always had a love for Jesus. I remember giving my heart to Jesus, being led by a guy's name was Harry Rockefeller. Harry Rockefeller led me to Christ when I was just before I started kindergarten. This is August of 1964, I believe it was. And remember, this is a true story. And it sounds corny what I'm about to say, but it's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I was evangelized by the Sound of Music. My parents did not want me to see that movie because they were afraid I'd want to be a Catholic. And by golly, they were right.
They were right.
There was,
This is a
you
story.
know, you think about this, how the glory and the majesty of God and of the church came through that movie, even though, it was campy and corny and everything, and Rodgers and Hammerstein weren't Catholic, so they certainly didn't understand the faith from the inside. But still, I remember two scenes in particular captivated me, and just, I mean, captivated me.
Mhm.
The one is when the nuns are singing in the morning, and they sing Rex Admirabilis. They don't sing it to Palestrina. They sing it to a setting actually that I think Rodgers and Hammerstein composed, but it's absolutely beautiful. And then they break out into the Alleluias. So they go from the Gregorian chant to the polyphony, which it was transportive. And the other scene that just I still get very moved thinking about it was the wedding scene,
Mhm. Mhm.
where obviously Julie Andrews as the bride leaves the convent, she leaves the grill, um, and she's processing down the aisle in this magnificent church.
Mm.
And you see that the glory and grandeur that God intends for people to live begins on earth now.
Yes.
And to see also those nuns who were celibates, they didn't get married, and yet their joy at their former sister going to get married, they were able to have a joy that didn't affect their own joy as celibates, and as nuns. That impacted me greatly, greatly. I was baptized when I was 9 years old. It was my choice. I wanted to receive communion, and I was going to a little Baptist day school, and the idea was you had to be baptized before you could receive communion. Obviously, we know that's true, but in a free church environment, that's not necessarily known or but I wanted it. I wanted to be baptized, so I asked for baptism.
Mhm.
I was baptized in October of 1969.
Mhm.
And I remember coming up out of the water. I remember the exhilaration. I remember there was a brightness and a freshness
Hmm.
that repeated itself again when I was confirmed, coming into full communion in 1990 as a Catholic. I went off to college. My plan was to be an international lawyer in New York. I've been encouraged to learn German because I was scheduled to be a pastor in the fundamentalist church, and they thought that the pastor thought it'd be good if I knew German theologically. So
Oh,
I
yes.
went to Germany. I went to Germany.
Mhm.
Um, I chose the college I chose in part because it had foreign study programs over there, and I walked into the cathedral at Mainz, Germany, which was the archdiocese from which Martin Luther launched his little revolt. And I remember being stunned, absolutely stunned, that I smelled the candles of 1,000 years and the incense of 1,000 years, and felt the presence of 1,000 years, and felt another presence. And I knew that there was something there that I wanted. And I knew that I didn't know it was a real presence, but I knew that there was something calling me to that. And so my first liturgical service was the Easter Vigil
Wow.
in,
Yeah.
in 1979, and then we went to Sunday Mass as the host family and I went to Sunday. And I started going to Mass, but I came back from Germany, and thought the altar was pretty cool, but didn't think celibacy was so cool. And so I had a roommate who was an Episcopalian who said, "Hey, you can do this." So I got really involved with the Episcopal Church.
Yes, sure. Mhm.
And I'm not one of those former Episcopalians who bashes the Episcopal Church.
Mhm.
The Episcopal Church gave me much.
Mhm.
Episcopalians gave me much. At the time I was an Episcopalian, I had a medical condition. I actually have acute sleep apnea, which was not diagnosed until I was 40 by my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. Um,
Mhm.
but I was clinically exhausted and clinically depressed for most of my life until about 40. And that produced some quirky behavior patterns.
Mhm.
And I found that the Episcopalians were very warm and loving and accommodating and gracious. And so, but there was always, for me, there was something that it was lacking. I was, very much involved in the high church side of the church. I love the incense and the candles. I just loved it.
Sure.
Um, I'd been introduced to monastic life at an Episcopal monastery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I met the Desert Fathers and Mothers through the Episcopal chaplaincy up at the college I attended. And so I had very warm, although I'd been raised anti-Catholic, I actually had very warm regard for Catholicism and things Catholic. So I went off to divinity school, wasn't ordained, had the opportunity, I suppose, to be ordained upstate New York in the Diocese of Albany, Episcopal Diocese of Albany, but it wasn't sitting right. It just wasn't sitting right. And so I left that community, although I was very much involved, and I had been involved in Curcio, the Anglican version of Curcio. I had met that.
Yes.
And came down to New Jersey, was involved in a charismatic community there for a while, and in the course of that experience, entered into full communion in 1990, February 18th, 1990, and had the same experience of whoosh enlightenment, spiritual elation when I entered into full communion with the church. So I had liked my studies in theology, thought I would end up being a theologian, wanted to be a theologian, so I went off to Europe to pursue the doctorate, but the sleep apnea got in the way. But that's when I started teaching and found out that I was a very good teacher and loved teaching, and came back to the States, taught for a while, administered for a while, and got involved in faith-based initiative.
Yeah, this kind of completes the circle, doesn't it, of how you ended up doing faith-based initiative work. What strikes me is that, many people that I interview on this particular channel will say that they either had an emotional or kind of a personal experience, or they came to Catholicism through the intellectual side of things. I'm sensing that you're telling us that it's both. You've had a lot of you loved certain, the candles, the incense, the sense of it all, the ceremony, I imagine, liturgically, as well as then intellectually, because to be a theologian, to, aim for that and to love your studies and to have your knowledge of the faith, that's a unique combination. And that's where you have come today. And your family, so you raised, as you said, in an anti-Catholic setting, and now you're in a parish. I noticed on the bio, and I'll just jump to this for a moment, there's a tenor kind of story here. So you're a singer and you are part of liturgical functions inside of your parish.
Yeah, so most of my wider family didn't mind so much when I became a Catholic, but it was hard for my parents. It was hard.
Yes.
I think it was hard for my mother's mother. But to your point, yeah, I mean, this is I think where my coaching and my educational work and my mentoring all come together. I don't just want to reach the head. I don't just want to reach the heart. If you reach the head, it's cold. If you reach the heart, it's soft. You've got to get them both together, right? Because there is such a thing as a Christian worldview. We see the world in different ways. And even though we see the world in ways that we think and that we know by revelation are actually loving and gracious and kind, to a mind that has not either received the light of grace or worked through the implications of divine revelation, some of the things we believe as Catholics can seem quite harsh, can seem quite demanding and unfair. And so I think this gets back to why we're having such a hard time with our kids accepting the faith, our kids and our grandkids. Well, I think it's a couple of reasons. The curricula, most of the curricula to which you're exposed are based on Enlightenment principles, which are materialist, which are quantitative, and which are anti-supernatural to the core. It's reason and reason alone.
Yeah.
Even Catholic schools, attempting to inculcate the faith, are using secular textbooks for secular subjects. And so you've got these textbooks that are basically anti-Catholic in their presuppositions, and then you present religion class for an hour a day if you got your kid in a Catholic school, or an hour a week if he or she is going to CCD, And what happens is the demands of the faith or the logic of the faith does not make sense to the kid. The average kid decides to persist or not in the faith by the age of 13. 13.
Yeah. I know anecdotally this, and others have said this to me, that there's a phenomenon at that age where kind of the utilitarian principles, the secular inculcation that has gone on in the school system and culturally all around them, even by faithful or conservative or neoconservative Catholics, whatever label, there's this thing that happens at that age, and then it's too late. They're lost. Well, they're not never lost forever, but then it's late in the game.
Well, the issue is they're not children anymore. They're on the way to becoming young adults, and because I said so doesn't work, whether it's mommy or daddy or Holy Mother Church.
Yeah.
It's I want the reasons, and the reasons have to make sense.
Yeah.
Because and I think that they're right to make that demand. I mean, we have to be able to enunciate the faith in ways that doesn't just fill the heart, but that's intellectually satisfying as well. People have to understand there is a worldview, there is a way of thinking, a way of perceiving reality that is not based in emotion or sentiment, but there is an education of emotion and sentiment in the faith.
Yeah.
But the faith is not, it's not therapeutic. I mean, it has a therapeutic effect, but if we approach the faith for its therapeutic value, it doesn't work. And we end up accommodating the faith to us and our weaknesses rather than responding to the demands of the faith by growing.
Right. Which then leads us on a slippery slope, not only of accommodating or accepting to promoting and living, things and approaches that are inimical to the Catholic faith. What would you say, David? You and I both, and I know we could tell stories about this. I'm approached constantly by families who want to, run a Catholic business. They want to do the things that the Catholic CEO teaches and that we believe in, but their children are estranged from the faith. Their grandchildren, their extended family. I have met so many people in the last couple of years where the brothers and the sisters, the siblings are all secular in their approach. I mean, and it's an impossible question I'm asking you, but what would you say? What do we do to parents and say to them, here's how you keep that child of yours at the age of 12, 13, 14 engaged in the faith? What would you say?
Your child is not going to be engaged in the faith if you're not engaged in the faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want your child to understand the reasons for being a Catholic and you can't explain the reasons to your child why you are a Catholic beyond this is our family tradition, it's going to be rough sledding. The faith makes demands. What I used to teach when I was teaching boys in high school was there's nothing more beautiful in life than the Catholic faith, the Catholic life lived in a state of grace. And there's nothing more monstrous than trying to live the life of grace without grace, because it can't be done. The demands of the faith cannot be fulfilled except by grace and our cooperation with it. And so if we're not actively cultivating the life of grace, if we're not also actively cultivating the life of the mind, and if the decisions we're making in our businesses, in our homes, don't reflect those commitments, then what the kids are hearing is, I go to heaven by being a good person, and I can be a good person without going to church, and church doesn't make sense to me anyway, so I'm just not going to go. And I'm going to be a good person. And if there's a heaven, then I'm going to go there. And if there's nothing, then who cares? I'm good anyway.
Yeah.
So if we want our kids to be coherent with the faith, we have to be coherent with the faith. That means in concrete, in terms of business deals, there's some business deals we won't do.
Yes.
Because we don't want to work with the people who are proposing a deal. That there's something about the deal that isn't right, or there's something about the way that person presents himself or herself as a business partner that is not Yeah, I suppose. Well, if I tweak it here, if I do this, if I do that, then I can make it work. And what the kids are seeing when we make those decisions is it's okay to compromise.
That's right. This is something that, at the age of 8 or 9, children can poke holes in their inconsistent behaviors of the parents or other people that are in authority over them. We both know this. And, I've come across this even with our clients. Unwittingly, some people are engaging in activities that are actually inimical to the Catholic faith. I'm not saying they're shorting a client, for example, or doing some overt thing, but they're only doing the minimum, for example, for their employees that the law requires. And I'm a proponent of saying, do more than the law requires. Be Catholic, recognize, excuse me, for example, here, have an afternoon off because it's your feast day. Today's we're recording this on the feast of St. Joseph, May the 1st. And, happy feast day, have the afternoon off. Now, the immediate response is, well, I can't do that because I'm going to lose money. Well, just a minute. If you do business well, and this is what we try to teach people, if you do business very well and have excellent management, early warning signals, good dashboards of information, you can do this generosity. And I'm only picking a simple example, as you can see, David, but you can do it, and you can then be something different so that the other people see that you're respectful of family, and that's a tangible thing. And the culture is, of course, trying to destroy the family, so we can do these little things. But getting back to your point, if the parents are exemplary in their practice of the faith, that's one thing. And it doesn't mean dragging the children to church, but I guess it does in some cases. What else? So exemplary parents who are living the faith and consistently, and in their life and business practices, living in accord with the faith consistently. What else do we do? What can parents teach their children, theology and philosophy, even if they're not steeped in it?
That's a very difficult thing. So again, to summarize what you just said, you've got to teach them the faith. You've got to live the faith. And I think one of the things that I think we've lost in contemporary Catholic life is a lively appreciation of the doctrine of providence. God is going to provide for our needs, and God cannot be outdone in generosity.
Yes.
And those who know that and practice it, I mean, our evangelical friends put us to shame on this point. Yeah. Can I teach my kids philosophy and theology? To the extent I know it, yeah, I should be able to teach it. But how much do I actually need to know? You ought to be able to teach your kid a catechism text. I mean, there's some good series out there. I like the Ignatius Press's Faith and Life. Ascension Press is doing some good stuff.
Yes.
And those are two that I know of. Those are not the only two for sure, but those are the two that I know and I respect quite a lot. Scepter Press does a good series as well. I think that if you understand what your kids are being taught in school and can actually teach it yourself, and they can see that you're trying to live it, that will go a long way. But the thing is, look, this is the thing we got to remember. And it could sound like I'm contradicting myself a little bit, but I'm not. When the church spread in the early days, when you could get killed for being a Christian, what they'd said about the Christians was not, look how much they know, or look at how they beat those philosophers in the philosophical arguments, or look at how much theology they know. What they said is, look at how they love each other.
They love each other. Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
And love is sacrificial. So, what does that mean? What could that mean? That could mean that as a dad, I do take the afternoon off to go to my son or my daughter's parent-teacher conference.
Yes.
It could mean that I say to my kids, we're not playing sports on Sunday because Sunday is the Lord's Day. And it's not a day to compete. It's we love competition. We think it's great, but I mean, we see this all the time, and you see kids and even parents going to Sunday mass in their shorts and sports gear because they're going to jet out the door to a game. I mean, so good that they're at mass, good that they're seeking to do that. But the thing is, it's not, there was a time in the culture when the Sunday, that we use the phrase your Sunday best.
Yep.
There was a reason why, you're going to church, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I will say my family did treat it like a big deal. I have a brother and a sister, and we all moved in different directions in the way we practice Christian faith, but all of us practice it ardently. And my brother had sons. He was one of our children. And all of his sons practice it. So I think you have to make a priority the practice of the faith. You have to make a priority of Sunday Mass. And dads, you have to be the one to set the example. Dads.
Exactly. Yeah.
You have to be the one saying, no, we're going. You have to be the one saying, no, you're going to wear proper shoes. No, you're not wearing that to Mass. And then you got to dress accordingly yourself. I mean, if you dress like you're going to the Lord's barbecue, then what are you really saying about the importance of the Mass?
Yeah, this is so we know that when the father is absent from the religious practice, invariably there's almost 100% chance that the children will not, if it's the mother leading. It's just the way the nature of the true patriarchal family actually works. Now, David, I'm going to really press you to the wall on a point here. What would you say to the 16-year-old who might be watching this and who's already decided, no, I'm not interested? Is there a message that you could say, and I know I'm putting you on the spot perhaps on this, but this is the fundamental time to grab that young person. Evidently, they've made their choice. The parents may not have been able to keep that child in the faith, that young person in the faith. Is there a message that you would give to that 16-year-old who's a skeptical or an inquiring mind or resistant?
Yeah, I'd say good for you for asking the questions. You're supposed to ask the questions. Your mind is designed to know things, and we know things by asking questions, and we know things by testing. Just remember that the church is big enough for your questions. You never need to leave the church. You never need to leave because you have questions that maybe a local priest or a catechist or an adult you trust can't answer it. The church does feed the life of the mind, but it's bigger than the life of the mind.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. David, let's move to an area that is, your life is replete with these activities. So you're in your parish, you're obviously in the choir, you're a Knight of Malta, you're a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, you're involved in these kind of, what one might say, prestigious activities, but also philanthropic and charitable and so on. What's that all about? Why are you motivated to do all of those things?
Thank you for the question. Being in those organizations for me is a public way of being a Christian. They also, I'm mindful of those passages in the gospel where Jesus says, don't put your light under a bushel.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you have to wear your faith on your sleeve. I'm not saying you have to do that, or every word out of your mouth has to be quoted, chapter and verse, whether it's of sacred scripture or a church father, a theologian, magisterium. We don't know it, that'll be inculcated in us, but I like the idea of public witness. The other thing I liked about the orders is it's public accountability.
Yes.
Public accountability. And they propose difficult ideals. And I think that we grow. I was attracted to those ideals. Why was I I don't know why I was attracted to those ideas. Here's the truth. I mean, I remember I was a little boy, probably 12 years old at the time, and I was in my office, my little bedroom desk, just kind of drawing. I've been reading about King David. My dad named me for King David. So I was reading about King David, and I was thinking about knights and chivalry and honor and all that kind of stuff. And I drew this shield, and I said, "Dad, isn't this cool?" isn't this cool? And he said, no, it looks so Catholic.
Oh,
Well,
this is
come to
really
find out,
great.
years later, without knowing what it was, I had drawn the coat of arms of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre. It
This
was
is great. I love it.
it was the Jerusalem cross. And then I remember when I went off to
Oh,
college, um, my first year advisor he was the college attorney, and he was wearing a Malta lapel pin, and I wasn't even Catholic at the time. I didn't know when I was going to become a Catholic, but I thought if there's a way for me to be a Knight of Malta someday, I'd want to do that. Public accountability. I mean, we have to. Um, I was fortunate in that I was given. I don't mention where I went to school for a reason, because I don't want to sound pompous, and it's important to some people, but it's just where I went to school. But I had a privileged education.
mhm.
And I do believe in the concept of la noblesse oblige. I mean, if you're given a lot, much is expected of you. And part of what's expected of us is to live publicly in a way that reflects the gospel, reflects and projects the gospel. And I find in these chivalric and religious orders, men and women who share these commitments and ideals, and together we do it better than when we do it by ourselves.
Yeah, I love this idea. I remember when I came into the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, a faithful priest who's now deceased gave us. It was a weekend of investiture, as you know the practice. It's a whole weekend, and so on the Saturday, following the Friday night vigil that we had, this priest gave us a 3-hour seminar on chivalry and the order, the history of the order, and so on. And he used phrases like, your job is to defend Christ. Your job is to defend the Holy Land and the holy sites. Your job is, and he pushed into our heads, particularly, your job is to defend Christ. Well, that's a public, you can't do that privately. If you want to defend somebody, I took away, you have to do it publicly. And so your note about that in the three orders that you're a part of, tell us a bit about these. Malta and Holy Sepulchre, many people know. St. George is perhaps less known to me anyway. What can you tell us just a little bit about those three orders, just so that our listeners can see what's going on with these three?
Sure. So a friend of mine in the Order of Malta pointed out that the phrase "defense of the faith," tuitio fidei. It's interesting. The word tuitio is the same word that is the Latin base of the word tuition.
Yes.
And what it really means is caring for the faith. That I mean, I sort of don't like the term defense of the faith, because there's nothing to defend. But there is something to be cared for. There is something to be loved. There is something to be nurtured. There is something to be shared. What drew me to Malta was, I think, of all the military orders, it was unique in that it was both hospital, military, and international.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the only one that had both. Of course, now obviously these days we don't have much of a military presence. We don't aspire to have a military presence, but we do. But we do look to go to difficult places, to places that are not easy to get to. Usually, the Order of Malta is the first one in, and the last to go.
Yes.
And we have the respect of, we have an active presence, for instance, in Muslim countries. So people who were formerly enemies, formerly, not formally, formerly enemies, see the humanitarian work that we do, and the fact that we give aid and assistance to whomever, regardless of religion, which is, of course, Catholic principle.
Yes, it is.
Holy Sepulchre was, I was invited to Holy Sepulchre by a man who's become, since the invitation, become a dear friend. But I remember seeing a man at our parish. I was at St. Catherine's of Siena in the Great Falls, Virginia at the time, and he was a lector, and he lectured in his vesture, in his cape and in his cap. And I was electrified by that. I thought that was so powerful. My wife Rosie said, "You really want that for yourself, don't you?" I said, "I would love it." And come to find out that her boss, who now our dear friend, was a member, and he sponsored me in. So Holy Sepulchre is different to Malta, right? Holy Sepulchre, Malta is very service oriented. It's hands-on.
Yep.
There's a quietness to Holy Sepulchre. I mean, we really we don't have that many hands-on projects that members do. It's a philanthropic organization supporting the Latin Patriarchate in Jerusalem.
Yes.
We're supporting the church in its mission of educating and caring physically as educational principle, but we also do work in the physical care of people in the lands that our Lord walked. And then how did I get into Constantinian order? Well, I knew a guy in Holy Sepulchre who was in a Constantinian order. I thought that was kind of cool. And he said, "You're not just chasing orders, or you don't just want to, you know."
I have 3 now. You're thinking to yourself, no.
But the thing was, I had what I'd loved about it again. First of all, the public witness. Secondly, the Constantinian order's got a bit of a complicated history. There are actually 3 branches to it. There's 2 Italian branches and a Spanish branch. And the university they went to overseas was in Spain. And I just came back from Spain. I mean, I came back half Spanish, I'm told. And it was just, I just resonated with the values of the Constantinian order. The idea of being a Christian witness, humanitarian witness. It also does educational ventures, and it just. I also like the fact that so Malta and Sepulchre are both their ecclesiastical organizations, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Holy Sepulchre is actually part of the papal household.
Yes.
And Malta is a lay religious order. The Constantinian order is a Catholic order, but it's a dynastic order. So it's tied to the house of Bourbon Two Sicilies. And so I have some Sicilian heritage. And I certainly had an inculcation in Spanish culture and living. And so when the opportunity presented itself, I said, yes, I think I want to do this. And so the Constantinian Order of St. George, Spanish branch in the United States, we're small but growing. And our principal apostolates are to support our military archdiocese and also the Holy Family Hospital in Bethlehem, which, of course, the Order of Malta also supports and runs.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, God bless you for all of that. I want to just jump very quickly now to one last topic for you, and that is, David, you know, we both are involved. You're a mentor, a coach, you're an advisor, a lot of different terminology there, but there's a lot of self-help. You know, you go to any bookstore, right? There's thousands of titles on self-help. Can you summarize in kind of your philosophy of mentoring and coaching in a self-help world where everybody is dying to have the tool and that special little nugget that's going to solve all of their, you know, psychological and existential problems?
If I could help myself in an ultimate sense, I wouldn't need a savior.
Yeah, well said.
I think that, you know, the self-help stuff is useful. I can correct behavioral difficulties. I can acquire skills that I need to acquire. I can acquire virtues that I need to acquire all in the human plane. And that's good to do. And it's good to be reminded all the time that we are, even on the natural level, we are capable of far more than we think we are. And learning how to organize our minds, learning how to organize our mental constructs in a way that allows us to achieve more, to be more authentically human in all of our pursuits is a good thing. But ultimately, it's not enough. I will be a sinner until the day I die. And ultimately, the problem is sin. All the distortions in my personality, all the distortions in other people's personality, in the final analysis is sin. And there's only one remedy for sin, and that's dying to it. And even if I died to my sin, my death would not in and of itself be redemptive, because the penalty for sin is death. So if I die, I'm only paying the penalty that's mine to pay.
Yeah.
What Christ offers us is transformation. What Christ offers us is newness of life. What Christ offers us is a way. I'm looking at a marvelous depiction of the crucifixion as I consider this point.
Mm-hmm.
What Christ offers us is a way to take the chaos and the despair and the desolation of pain that we all feel, because we all feel our human limitations. We all know that no matter how hard I push myself, no matter how hard I try not to do it, I slip.
Yep.
You know, or I don't progress as much as I think I should progress. If I can unite my emptiness, if I can unite my pain to Christ on the cross, I can gain from him the strength that I need to make the changes that I need and the wisdom to know how to do that. I remember I was doing a self-directed Ignatian retreat. People say that I'm a Jesuit at heart. I don't know that that's true, but I certainly love St. Ignatius. I was doing a self-directed 30-day retreat, and one of the most powerful scenes for me was when Jesus leaves from the Praetorian Guard and he looks at Peter,
Mm-hmm.
who just betrayed him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in my mental composition of that scene, I was doing in our adoration chapel.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing this in front of the Blessed Sacrament in exposition.
Mm-hmm.
He turned and looked at me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was a game changer.
Yeah.
That was the game changer, to see how Jesus, in the desolation and the pain that I caused him,
mm-hmm.
still loves me and still accepts me and still says, come on, you can do this. Together we can do this. It's take my yoke upon me, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I mean, that's what we need in the end. I mean, because we were created, ultimately in the first analysis, we were created for fellowship with God. And we tried, St. Augustine wrote about this in the Confessions centuries ago. We try to stuff in that God chamber in our souls. We try to stuff everything but God, and it doesn't work. And it might work for a while, you know, and let's be, you know, some guys are really happy with their toys, and they have nice toys. I mean, let's
Sure.
some of them really do. But in the end, is their life full? Well, if they say that it is, I don't know what to say. I mean, good for you, I suppose. The fullness of life that I have sought comes through my identification with Christ on the cross.
Yep. Yep.
In the acceptance of apparent failure, in the acceptance of the loneliness of leadership,
Yeah.
in acceptance of the pain of being misunderstood by those whom I have instructed and helped and taught. He can bear it because he is God, but because he's God, he can share with me some of his power.
Yep.
So that I can bear it too. And then when I can accept the pain and suffering that's inherent in the human condition, both because of my own sin and the sins of others, and the chaos that we go through with all these conflicting, I mean, there are 8 billion wills on this planet, and they're all more or less in conflict with each other. I mean, we do align sometimes, but it takes a lot of work for that to happen.
Yeah.
But when I can accept his love and his grace and his power in the cross and live that way, and I can look at someone else's weaknesses and sinfulness with his eyes and perceive them through his heart. Because, when God looks at us, he looks past the sin to the masterpiece that he created.
Yeah.
And if I can bring that heart and that vision to the people I deal with, then that's a good day,
Yeah.
whether the balance sheet improved or not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. David, you've said much today. We've come to the natural end of our time together. I know we could say a lot more, and we will at some point. Maybe if you bring us to a close by mentioning, contact information, where can we reach you? What services are you offering? If you have any events coming up, that sort of thing. If you could bring us to close on that, it would be, I think, very useful for our audience.
Well, thank you for that. I can be the easiest way to reach me is LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. For my work with Atolo, we will be having a discovery meeting probably in the next 2 months here in the Washington, D.C. area for small and mid-cap sole proprietors who are looking for assistance in integrating spiritual, personal, and professional growth. If you're interested in Catholic education, please contact me. I have a lot of thoughts on how to organize curricula. I have a lot of thoughts on how to reach, particularly boys. I've taught boys and girls effectively, but I seem to have a particular way of reaching boys that they respond to. And I think I would say, right now, this is not an easy time to be a boy. It's not. The educational system is geared toward girls, to helping girls. We're trying to correct inequities of centuries long standing, and in that process, boys are often neglected, and they don't have good role models. They don't have good role models among their peers. There are not a lot of male teachers in a lot of school systems, and dad is absent because he's working.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in, particularly in the education of boys, and you happen to live in Northern Virginia, please reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'm working with a group. We were dormant for a while, but now it looks like we could be gearing up again to try once again to create a school that will educate young men to be leaders of leaders in Catholic principles. We want them to understand the faith. We also, I want them to understand these virtues of chivalry, because first of all, they're beautiful. And second of all, they're misunderstood. And third of all, when they're lived well and naturally, it produces remarkable results in the lives of those who live them and the lives of those who are touched by them.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, David Carradini, it's been a great pleasure to have you. God bless you and your work and your family. And for everyone else that has been listening and watching today, thanks very much for joining us. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Catarna. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
God bless.